My feelings on Tears of the Kingdom, though still highly positive, are complicated, and I will extrapolate further on them in my standalone video on the game. For the sake of this video, I wanted to mention one particular aspect: player freedom. And rest assured, I still love the game in spite of what I'm about to say. On my first playthrough, I fell in love with the possibilities for solving problems with Zonai devices, as did many other players. You all got to watch that unfold as I uploaded an edit of my first playthrough. I was left positively dumbfounded by what they had accomplished. As I played through it again, however, I eventually found myself exhausted by how easy most puzzles had become, since I had the prior knowledge necessary to break the game in half, almost as though the game was only meant to be played once, despite the freedom at play. Be it some sort of flying machine, a rocket or bomb flower fused to my shield, or some other wacky contraption. Handcrafted puzzle solutions were shoved aside in favor of my experiments, which, while really cool on their own, can get old when you know exactly how you're going to approach a problem every single time. The game accomplished something that few games have. It's unquestionably remarkable what they've done here, but in focusing on that, it also at times trivialized solutions to problems. If there's one thing that I learned from revisiting Tears of the Kingdom, it's that I felt that solutions driven by complete player agency are at their best when they feel sufficiently earned. When I really racked my brain over a puzzle, using the tools at my disposal to carve my own path. The game often had those moments, without question. I still really enjoy playing it. I just think you have to be careful when making a game like this. Think about how Breath of the Wild's puzzles, though not designed for open-endedness, were made so thanks to the wide range of applications available with your runes. That's the kind of freedom that I love, when I feel like a menace in the face of the intended solution. And don't get me wrong, Tears of the Kingdom offered that too. It was just a bit too easy to be a menace in that game, and it became tiring after a while. Again, I'll talk more about this in a separate video, with more specific examples and anecdotes. Despite all of this, I was still more than happy to see where enabling player freedom and expression would take the Zelda series, and I didn't have to wait long after Tears of the Kingdom to find out. The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom is a landmark game in the series for multiple reasons. It is the first original mainline 2D Zelda since A Link Between Worlds, which came out 11 years ago. It was developed by Grezzo, who worked with Nintendo to develop Ocarina of Time 3D, Four Swords Anniversary Edition, Majora's Mask 3D, Triforce Heroes, and the Link's Awakening remake. They have a strong history with and understanding of Zelda, and despite my reservations with Majora's Mask 3D and the Link's Awakening remake in particular, the former I don't think I've ever talked about on the channel, I might have to change that, I still had no doubt that they would be able to create something fun. Triforce Heroes, despite what you might have heard, is genuinely really well designed when you are able to play it with two other people that you can actually speak to and coordinate with. It has its own fair share of problems, but the main quest is great fun, and it demonstrates the kind of lateral thinking possible when you have to design for 3 players in a Zelda dungeon. Additionally, Four Swords' Anniversary Edition re-release had original levels that were by far the most intricate and challenging in the game, both the Realm of Memories and the Hero's Trial. We'll talk more about those games in detail in a future video as well, but the point is that Grezzo has an intimate understanding of the Zelda series. And due to their original work being centered around multiplayer games, they have also had to think outside of the box a lot, which is why Echoes of Wisdom was the perfect opportunity for them. A lot of the insight I now have on this game's design comes directly from the developers themselves, as they gave an interview shortly before the game's release. To come up with the core concept for Echoes of Wisdom, a large-scale pitching process was held at Grezzo, where dozens of employees pitched their ideas in front of Eiji Aonuma himself. This gave pretty much everyone a chance to have their ideas be heard out, which is incredible. According to co-director Satoshi Terada, there was a time where every single one of Grezzo's employees was thinking of ideas. Giving everyone the chance to have their ideas be heard, and treating this game like a blank slate for creativity, is exactly the kind of thing that I think makes each Zelda game so unique and creative. In the end, a lot of people shared common ideas despite not brainstorming them together, and the team eventually settled on the one that showed the most promise for problem solving, combat, and player freedom, copying elements from the game world and pasting them to approach situations in your own way. Or at least, that's what it eventually became. As the game began to coalesce, the team began to realize that featuring Link as the protagonist didn't make as much sense, because they were often using echoes to fight instead of their sword and shield, which made them feel woefully out of place. This led to Princess Zelda becoming the protagonist for the first time.
Good.
Okay, second time.
Zelda.
Okay, third time in the series' history. Aonuma had mulled over making Zelda playable for a long time, but this gameplay style, in my opinion, gives Zelda her own mechanical identity beyond just inheriting Link's moves. Coincidentally, this game was co-directed by Tomomi Sano, the first female director in the series' history. I had reservations over the game's focus on player freedom when it was revealed. I didn't want it to lean too heavily into breaking the game in half, nor did I want it to be too easy to do so. However, now that I've completed the game, I can safely say it is an extremely inventive, intelligently designed, and endlessly fun Zelda game that is true to the series' spirit in every way. And it actually addresses issues I had with Tears of the Kingdom, while still allowing you to be a menace, and feeling like you've earned it. I have a lot to say about this game, and I want to commend Grezzo for what they've achieved, so without further ado, I'm Liam Triforce, and this is The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom. One thing that did catch me off guard right away was the reuse of assets from the remake of Link's Awakening. That art style always felt personal to that remake, an atmospherically nostalgic toy diorama of sorts that felt deliberate and melancholic in the face of that game's narrative. I wasn't entirely okay with them repurposing the game's art style, but I thought about it for a bit, and I realized my favorite Zelda game's art direction went on to inform multiple games in the series, including the Minish Cap, which has absolutely gorgeous art direction and a vibe completely distinct from the Wind Waker. Echoes of Wisdom still has flourishes of its own that made me really happy, including the multiple outfits and the look and feel of the interpretations of Zelda characters we haven't seen in a long time. More on that later. The game begins with a cold open in which you control Link with all 20 heart containers, fully upgraded weapons, and for the first time in a 2D Zelda, a baked-in jump button that you can use anytime. You ascend the castle to fight Ganon, and you wield not the Master Sword, but the Sword of Might. I knew that Link would eventually be cast into a rift from the first trailer, but this kind of thing made me wonder what Link's adventure was like leading up to this point. I mean, this is the first game we haven't been able to control him and experience his growth, and any context we can gather of his adventure prior to this moment is from characters around the overworld. Apparently he came from a small village in the south, and people around there in the rest of the world seem to really like him, but there are no clues to the other circumstances of his journey. The cool thing about this sequence, though, is that we can assume the kind of things he went through, as you're fighting Ganon at the very beginning of the game. There's no need to dwell on the things typical of Link's adventures, as you've seen them countless times. They waste no time in making you feel powerful, only to take those powers away. Before Link is consumed by the rift, he manages to free Zelda, who is left to follow a mysterious light out of the tower as the rift spreads fast. Zelda returns to her people, and as she stands before her father the king, as well as new characters Minister Left and General Right... Oh, come on now. Minister Left and General Right? You know what, I can't help but love that. Either way, as Zelda stands before them, they too are pulled into these mysterious rifts, only for them to be spat back out, and for the king to throw his own daughter in prison for supposedly creating the rifts. And so, here we are. My first instinct was to crawl under the bed like in Metal Gear Solid. Actually, I'm getting deja vu here for another reason. This is where Midna shows up in Twilight Princess after you fumble around for a bit. Sure enough, this game's companion appears before us in our cell, Tri, and we receive the rod that allows us to play with this game's central mechanic. That Metal Gear Solid comparison isn't that far off actually, as you need to learn and use these echoes in order to sneak around the soldiers on patrol down here. It's an excellent tutorial, as it shows you the effectiveness of using objects of different sizes, a subconscious thing that is extremely important in assembling paths for yourself, as your jump height is pitiful and will only get you so far. You can find a piece of equipment to increase your jump height later on, which is extremely useful, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Another thing that's an important distinction from Tears of the Kingdom is that you have to earn echoes. Be it an inanimate object, an enemy, a weapon, a cloud, what have you, the game does not give you the tools necessary to be a mischievous little goblin. As early as this tutorial sequence, you have to find the pot echo for throwing at enemies. You have to find the potted plant echo in order to make a bridge. You have to find the bed echo in order to be able to sleep in the middle of a combat scenario and restore hearts, as well as make a bed staircase. The point I'm trying to make is that all of the echoes you are using across the game world to solve problems are a result of your own exploration. They aren't given to you, you have to find them and fight for them. If I want to summon a Wolfos in combat, then I have to hunt down and kill a Wolfos myself, which I fought with a Moblin that I found and defeated with my sea urchins, which I also found. If I need a more substantial way to approach large gaps, tall heights, or maneuver around obstacles, then I'll need to go out and find the echoes necessary to do that. This provides the game with an inherent progression in difficulty and your own capabilities, despite it being a non-linear game to some extent. This also extends to dungeons because although they can be solved with a variety of echoes, they still feature unique, powerful echoes that can be used in many ways. It makes the entire game feel so worthwhile to explore, because you're finding all of these objects that have defining characteristics, not just in their primary function, but also in how they interact with each other. Making a staircase out of objects with different sizes, swinging on strantulas after attaching them to the ceiling, riding atop a pathblade in order to zoom through the overworld. The list goes on. It's almost as though key dungeon items are scattered all throughout the game world, and you can find them and use them as you explore. Each major area has its own echoes that enable you to explore and solve not just the area they are found in, but the rest of the world altogether, giving the game a sense of design cohesion as well. Further fleshing out the manner in which you interact with things is the bind ability. At the press of a button, you can grab an object like Ultra Hand in Tears of the Kingdom, and it will follow your exact movements. You can also move while pulling it against an object in order to create some distance between you and it, creating some brilliant puzzles that take advantage of your spatial awareness. And you can use it in other ways too. You can also use Reverse Bind, in which you will remain motionless, but the thing you are attached to will pull you around instead. Again, this is used in puzzles as well, but it's incredible to see the possibilities that can come from binding yourself to something that can fly or ascend. I used Reverse Bind a lot in conjunction with the Crawltula, as this beast of a spider can crawl up pretty much any wall, which led to me gaining some incredible height and taking massive shortcuts. At one point, I was honestly afraid of the capabilities of this combo. In Jabul Ruins, I managed to find a way to access the big key right away, without even solving the dungeon's central puzzle. The dungeon is structured kind of like a Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom dungeon, in which you have to gradually reach the top floor by solving each little section of the dungeon. Essentially, I bound myself to a Crawltula, skipped having to raise the water level, grabbed the big key, and went straight for the end of the dungeon. I actually felt guilty doing this at the time, and it made me wonder if the rest of the game would have instances like this. Thankfully, this ended up being a freak accident in the face of the rest of the dungeons, which made it all the more hilarious and exciting in hindsight. I felt like a menace in a good way. When it comes to player freedom and emergent solutions in a Zelda game, I think there's something to be said about just how open-ended the tools at your disposal can be. Because when you know exactly how you're going to approach each problem, the satisfaction just isn't the same as doing something you know the developers didn't intend. Echoes of Wisdom addresses this through having you explore for your puzzle solutions, and by imposing limitations on how many echoes you can summon, and how costly they are to summon to begin with. Tri starts out by only being able to summon echoes totaling to 3 triangles at a time, meaning that you can only summon 3 beds or a single moblin, etc. This imposes limitations on just how much mobility you'll have over chasms, or how capable you can be in combat, unless you get creative. I've always felt that limitations breed creativity, and this game is definitely emblematic of that philosophy. With limitations on what and how many echoes you can summon, it feels all the more gratifying when you do something cool. Once again, you have to earn the ability to be more flexible with your echoes, and by the time you do have the ability to summon beefier echoes, both in quantity and quality, you'll feel like you've sufficiently earned that, in a manner similar to increasing Link's strength across one of his games. To increase this limit, you'll need to free Tri's friends by clearing up rifts around the overworld. and completing the game's dungeons. Your limit can be expanded to 6 triangles, and you can also decrease the cost of summoning certain echoes just by increasing Tri's strength. These things make freedom something that you can work towards, and gives the game a defined loop of its own alongside Link's previous adventures. I was really impressed with how much fun I was having solving this game's problems, despite how much freedom you are afforded, simply because they dole out your solutions gradually through the wonderful act of going on an adventure. And to me, that has always been what Zelda is at its core. Of course, there are still echoes in this game that are pretty busted. Yes, sleeping during a combat encounter to restore hearts is wild, but at the very least, they don't always make it easy to do so. The cloud echo found in Lanayru trivialized pretty much anything that had to do with chasms, and when I was able to summon 3 of them at a time, ascending mountains or crossing large gaps essentially boiled down to flying over them like a superhero. I feel as though this was unavoidable, but I'm not nearly as bothered because you still have to earn the ability to break the game with them through finding them, and having enough resources to summon multiple of them in the first place. On the other side of the spectrum for echoes are their applications in combat. I won't lie, combat starts out clunky and awkward. You don't initially have any direct way of attacking enemies, so you'll either have to do what I did and spam sea urchins in order to trap and rapidly poke enemies to death, or wait for your goofy echo to do the work for you while you run around and dodge like a coward, or some other variation of this that I haven't mentioned, because after all, this is an open-ended game. It doesn't exactly feel empowering at this stage, but just like in puzzle solving, you'll gradually find more and more echoes through the progression of the game, and eventually, it felt like I was playing an entirely different game. I'd summon ball and chain knights to deal consistent damage while also using elemental keys to home in on weak points. The different Wizrobes allowed me to attack from afar reliably as they would teleport around the arena, and the White Wolfos, which you find in the Ice Dungeon, ended up being one of the most useful echoes in combat, because it is quick, powerful, and it summons other Wolfos that will attack different enemies at the same time. At its best, the combat felt like a summoner's build in an action RPG, discarding the numbers and added variables typical of that genre, and instead focusing on what summons would benefit you most, while also making movement a core part of each scenario, as you also have to dodge attacks. I was having a blast with combat by the end of the game. I thought it was something entirely unique and intensely engaging, and I even felt that it offered far more possibilities than a lot of games in the Zelda series. It's also important to mention that you are able to gain access to Link's abilities for a short period of time. Upon reaching certain points in the game's dungeons, you'll come across a battle with a corrupted version of Link. In these fights, he'll use the weapon you're about to receive against you, and upon defeating him, you will be able to change into a sword fighter form for a limited time. This allows you to directly attack enemies as Link would, and when you use this in conjunction with echoes, you can decimate any encounter. I'd say when you get the hang of your tools, this game becomes pathetically easy. Maybe it's just my experience with other Zeldas talking, but I really appreciate the option to switch to hero mode at any time. Double damage and a lack of heart pickups makes playing the game a lot more delicate, especially in the early game as you fight to obtain more echoes. You can't spam the sword fighter form though, as replenishing your meter isn't easy, at least not without equipment that lets you replenish it faster. You have to be smart about when and how you use it, otherwise letting your echoes do the work. This adds another tactical element to combat that I appreciate, and it comes especially in handy in larger battles and boss fights. Speaking of that, where I felt combat shined most of all was in the bosses. Universally, interacting with each boss is the same. You'll need to use echoes in order to attack them, and use your sword fighter form sparingly, all the while dodging all of the stuff the boss throws at you. Due to the nature of combat, I feel that bosses are often far more involved, because despite being able to send stuff out to do the work for you, the game is constantly making you dodge all sorts of attacks at the same time. It's incredibly intense, despite the game not asking you to attack enemies directly. While I'm dodging Goma's attacks, I try to lock onto the gems on its legs with electric keys, and then once it falls to the ground, I shred its eyeball with ball and chain knights. Using these knights made me realize just how fun it is to weaponize enemies from previous Zelda games that always gave me a hard time. Finally, their patterns can be used against things other than me for once. You also have to be careful of the spiderweb slowing you down, which is a huge detriment to the one thing that you constantly have to worry about, regardless of what echoes you are using to fight: moving around. The fight with Scorchill was a ton of fun as well, capping off a creative dungeon that balances fire and ice in its central mechanic and layout. The basic idea is that you have to counter the element on its helmet before yanking it off with bind and dealing damage. All the while, there are hazards everywhere, as you'd expect. Volvagia also shares a lot of core design traits with the other bosses, retooling the idea of moving around the arena and using echoes in a compelling, and not to mention challenging manner. I didn't really like the mole boss due to how difficult it was to consistently deal damage, as it was constantly moving around, but it's the only sore spot in otherwise great boss design. Even the Ganon fight was great, as your approach to him needs to be completely different than it would be with Link. People tend to optimize the fun out of games with player choice, but so long as your choices are working for you, I don't see why you should have to play the game any differently. In this case, I found a rhythm that worked, and I slipped into it comfortably while doing my best to avoid attacks. It's been fascinating to see just how different players approach the same problems, as it showcases pure individuality through gameplay. This is something I really admired about overcoming bosses in Elden Ring or some other action-adventure games and RPGs, driven by player choice. Regardless of what the so-called best way is to tackle a problem, the solution is earned, and it is personal to you, and how you like to play the game. Just as Tears of the Kingdom enabled this in remarkable ways, I felt Echoes of Wisdom built on that philosophy in ways that not only improved on Tears of the Kingdom, but also carried its own identity at the same time. Let's talk about the things that are important to making Zelda stronger. First, there are might crystals. Similarly to the seashells in Link's Awakening, these are used to upgrade not just your sword, but also your bow, bombs, and your energy meter for staying in sword fighter form. Also, heart pieces are finally back. Though Breath of the Wild did have puzzles in its world that led to shrines with spirit orbs, there's nothing quite like seeing a heart piece in the wild and figuring out how to obtain it. You can obtain both of these things by doing anything and everything around the overworld, just as you would in any other Zelda game. It's funny to think that something as simple as this has me so excited. It's not that I disliked finding shrines, but having these things be seamlessly integrated into the world is far more enjoyable for me than having to load a separate area every time you find a shrine. You can definitely have non-linearity in a Zelda game, and this sense of seamlessness. A Link Between Worlds proved it, and so does this game. Though this game's Hyrule bears resemblance to A Link to the Past in its topography and locales, like the fact that there is an optional temple in the Eastern Palace with a boss that has you dragging each piece of it together with bind and echoes, Grezzo chose to expand the world even further, making this one of the largest 2D Zeldas ever. These new regions correspond to the geography established in the more recent 3D Zeldas, including the Faron, Eldin, Lanayru, and Gerudo regions, each with their own theming and flourishes. The Faron region was a lot of fun to dig into. Deku Scrubs have finally made their return, and these goobers are hilarious to interact with. I love hearing them talk about the prison in Scrubton. Yes, that is what the town is called. This one says, "This is the Clink, the Hooskow. It's where we put folks who've done bad things. Thieves always end up in the Clink." The fact that the Scrubs call it the Clink just really made me happy. The boss of the Faron Temple is Goma, a giant spider, so when you first arrive there, you'll see Scrubs happily eating what looks like cotton candy. This cotton candy's so tasty, you'd never guess it was made out of spider webs. Tri assesses the situation before flying back over to Zelda and bluntly saying, they're eating spider webs. God, I love Zelda's goofy-ass whimsical dialogue. Such a great series for it. You end up getting thrown in jail for clearing up the rift in Scrubton. The guard leaves their key behind, and from here, you'll find yourself in a similar scenario to the dungeon of Hyrule Castle. Only this time, the Scrubs will confiscate your Tri-Rod, meaning you can't summon echoes here. Think of it like Eventide Island in Breath of the Wild, or the Forsaken Fortress in the Wind Waker. You'll have to use bind on the objects at your disposal in order to sneak through undetected, and there's an optional room here that contains one of the most perplexing puzzles in the entire game. There's a heart piece up here, and in order to reach it, you'll have to assemble a staircase using only the objects in this room. It's a real head-scratcher, and I'm sure there's multiple solutions, but the amount of lateral thinking and assembling I did in order to finally reach this thing made me realize just how much consideration went into the possibilities for echoes, especially in the early game, as well as what bind can accomplish when you carry objects with you as you ascend to higher levels of elevation. I also really enjoyed seeing the Sea and River Zora come together over a common goal. I don't think I've ever seen these two kinds of Zora live together in the same world, and their unification through music was quite heartfelt. But my absolute favorite storyline in any region goes to Lanayru. It begins with Zelda having to ascend through harsh conditions, encountering ice echoes, and trying to keep warm along the way. Eventually you'll run into a Yeti named Konde, and he'll escort you to his house to warm up. If you're a fan of Twilight Princess, this revelation will probably make you feel warm and fuzzy immediately. And yes, this storyline does revolve around love, though not a romantic love this time. This one's about the love Konde has for his family. He looks up to his brother a lot, as he taught him many things, and there seems to be a memorial to his father outside of his house, which he pays his respects to. Something doesn't seem to be quite right with his brother, though, and he worries that his brother is upset with him for not doing a good enough job on the mountain. He's also been waiting for him to come home for a long time now, which means that it's time to help Konde out and solve this dungeon for him. As an aside, the dungeons in this game are generally great. They return to a more traditional structure and layout, with keys and echoes that help you gradually unlock and solve the dungeon in a linear fashion. The only exception to this is Jabul Ruins, which I broke in half as a result of its non-linearity. The Faron Temple had great atmospheric music, played with the weight of the echoes you summon in cool ways, a non-linear center room that branches off for keys, and like most dungeons in this game, it is interconnected inside and out, asking you to exit into the still world at times to find new areas. Lanayru Temple in particular had a wonderful central mechanic involving melting and freezing the ice in order to approach different areas. Though its layout was pretty straightforward, I had so much fun with this dungeon that I didn't particularly mind. If you enjoyed tried and true Zelda dungeons and felt the more recent 3D Zeldas were sorely lacking in that department, I think Echoes of Wisdom not only nails its dungeon design, but the dungeons also allow for this game's unique properties to truly flourish, as you generally have agency over how you solve most problems. Anyway, as you confront Scorchill, you'll realize that it's not actually Konde's brother that you saw earlier, a fact that Konde takes solace in, as he continues to wait for his brother to return. Konde eventually realizes that, despite his brother not being home, he holds on to his faith in him, and trusts that he'll return when his adventure finally ends. He puts aside his loneliness out of excitement and trust in his brother, and he maintains optimism as he goes about his daily patrol on the mountain. I am extremely passionate about having strong emotional cores at the heart of each dungeon in a Zelda game. Be it the Snow Peak Ruins' love story, the Forest Temple's many monkeys coming together to assist Link, the Shadow Temple carrying the weight of Hyrule's bloody history, the Divine Beasts carrying the weight of each champion's failures to kill the blights plaguing them, the Earth and Wind Temples and their sages, the list goes on really. I think having a storyline driving each dungeon is something I've always connected with, and it's something that I'm glad Grezzo seemed to understand was important to the heart of Zelda. The real best character in Echoes of Wisdom, however, is the stamp guy. The way he talks about how satisfying it is to hear a stamp plunk down immediately makes me think he gets some sort of sexual gratification from it. I mean, hey, to each their own, I guess. Each of his stamps depict him as this swole hunk of masculinity. It gives off Tingle energy for sure. Completing a stamp card actually nets you a reward, so it's worthwhile to explore for them all. And although the stamp outfit you receive for finding them all is functionally useless, it is still pretty hilarious to wear around. Also functionally useless is the green tunic you receive from clearing all of the trials in the Slumber Dojo. But it's cool to see Zelda wearing it in the first place. The Slumber Dojo actually turned out to be one of my favorite pieces of side content in the game, as it has many trials that remind me of Eventide Island in Breath of the Wild, having you relearn echoes and little puzzle box style dream sequences, as well as other challenges and boss rushes. Really, the world is filled with so much to do that makes Zelda such a fun game to discover and experience. Be it quests in each region that give each tribe a chance to shine, obtaining a horse, beating optional bosses and temples for heart pieces, minigames, and everything I've just mentioned, Echoes of Wisdom is a joy to discover, and you have complete freedom to discover it however you like as it gradually opens up. There's a lot going on, and it is all made more fun due to just how strong the game's core concept is. It's also nice to hear Zelda's lullaby kick off the overworld theme every time you step outside. It's a great reminder that this journey is personal to her. I did have issues with the game here and there. In addition to the grievances I mentioned earlier, the smoothies didn't make enough of a difference in the game for me to care about making them like I did cooking in Breath of the Wild. Like, the healing capabilities they have are fantastic, for sure, but the effects they can carry, such as defense buffs, wall climbing speed, swim speed, and whatnot, didn't last long enough for me to invest resources in them. And I mean, if they lasted too long, then the game would suddenly become a lot easier than it already can be. I was totally fine with discovering and doing quests for equipment though. I always loved seeing how I could assemble equipment that worked best for my playstyle. I also never used automatons, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of you never knew these were in the game to begin with. Dompe can assemble unique contraptions based on the echoes he requests, and while the effects they carry are pretty wild and useful, they also take a while to wind up, which I found cumbersome in the long run. The biggest thing I took issue with, however, was the performance. The game seemingly wants to hit 60 frames per second, but due to the intensity of everything on screen, it primarily stays at 30, at least in the overworld. It's jarring how often it jumps around. The Link's Awakening remake liked to do this when entering new areas, but this is on a whole other level. It's certainly playable, but my guess is that Nintendo is banking on their next console improving performance in games like this. Well, it'll be nice to upgrade from a toaster to a slightly more powerful toaster. I also heard some people complain about having to sort through multiple echoes to find the one they wanted to use, but between sorting through different categories of echoes and the handbook on the pause menu, I never had any problems. But yeah, I can see why this would be annoying. Either way, let's talk about the ending. After solving a mystery of the Eternal Forest and entering the Still World for the final time, solving a buffet of ideas sampled from everything across the game, you will finally be able to free Link from imprisonment. You will enter the body of this game's true villain, Null, an all-powerful force that seeks to consume and corrupt the whole world. What I absolutely love about this segment is that you have to work together with Link constantly, both in combat and in puzzle solving. You obviously can't go into sword fighter form here, as Link has the weapons back, but it makes for some exciting and dynamic gameplay. My only problem? There's just not enough of it. I wanted to see far more gameplay involving cooperation with Link in this part of the game. It's just that I had so much fun with what was here that I couldn't help but want more. To be fair, we do get a solid helping of cooperative gameplay in the final boss, which is excellent by the way. The first phase has you and Link fighting together. The second has you swimming in order to catch up with Null and deal damage, and the final phase is an all-out combat encounter that builds on the first phase and spawns echoes of bosses you've defeated. Look at how much is going on in this boss fight. A mage build in The Legend of Zelda goes harder than you'd think. One thing I will say is that I wish, if only for the final phase, that Link was captured one final time and you were given back your tools so that you had that extra layer of tactical gameplay for the final fight. It seems really odd to pour resources into upgrading them, only for them to suddenly not matter. I also would have taken issue with the fact that Zelda didn't solely defeat Null herself after everything she went through, but then again, Zelda has been there numerous times to back Link up in the previous Zelda games, and I always adored these instances, so I ended up falling in love with the idea of the two of them feeling like equals in the end here. Despite the central narrative being relatively average, it was entertaining, and I especially cared about the stories that were told within the world itself. And on top of that, I couldn't help but feel sad when I had to say goodbye. Not just to this game, but to Tri. I mean, this is the first time we've had a companion in a Zelda game in years, let alone a good companion. Sorry, Fi, that was rude. I'll replace the batteries in my Wii Remote just for you. It was fun watching Tri gain emotions over the course of the game and react to different situations. A subtle but charming companion. and I came to genuinely cherish their presence by the end. Moreover, the existence of Null carries with it fascinating implications on Zelda's lore, as Null apparently existed before the creation of the world itself. As I mentioned, this game does not feature the Master Sword in any capacity, and Ganon is summoned as an echo for Null, a force that the goddesses of Hyrule apparently sealed away as well. It also doesn't aim to explain the origins of this cycle as Skyward Sword did. As the Master Sword is not present, that darkness being Demise and his incarnations in Ganon, we can only assume that this game might actually be the earliest point in Zelda's history. Either that, or it takes place long after anything else in the timeline, where the Master Sword is no longer necessary as Ganon never returns. Or the developers have all but given up on trying to slot games into the timeline, instead telling isolated stories that needn't be connected to anything else, at least not explicitly. But I doubt that. I feel that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's specific connection to previous games will be debated just as much as the timeline itself was, which I honestly welcome. I never liked the idea of a timeline being set in stone. I always preferred attempting to piece it together myself, thanks to elements being open to interpretation. And I also feel that there is inherent value in connecting those standalone stories to previous ones in the Zelda series. Ultimately, I won't aim to theorize here. I love seeing the kinds of interpretations that fans come up with, as it reminds me of a time before we had a quote-unquote official timeline to go off of. In summary, Echoes of Wisdom is an excellent game for Zelda to call her own. I appreciate that rather than trying to simply replace Link with Zelda, they instead gave her a mechanical identity so that her debut game would be wholly unique, setting itself apart from the rest of the Zelda series in the process. Grezzo did an amazing job with this game. I don't know if they will continue to create original works with Nintendo as Capcom did with the Oracle games and the Minish Cap, but I sincerely hope they do. I do kind of have a feeling this game won't click with everyone, which, to be fair, should not be the goal of any game. There's no reason any game should try to please everyone, as long as the people that make it are content with what they've created. I'm just thinking that there is a reason for people to dislike how this game feels. I know the combat will turn some people away at first, but I feel that you have to think beyond just lacking Link's tools, and think more along the lines of, how can I get Echoes to do all of this for me? In doing that, you will prevail. Some might not love this continued focus on discarding deliberate, intentional solutions for player freedom like this, but I do believe this game addresses problems that arose from that freedom in Tears of the Kingdom, all the while still feeling like you've earned solutions when you find them. The game demonstrates that, despite resounding acclaim, the people behind Zelda are always willing to listen as they move forward with what they want to pursue, in an effort to consistently make some of the most lovable and creative games in the industry. That said, no two Zelda games are exactly alike, and that is especially true for this one. To put it simply, Echoes of Wisdom used Zelda to remind me of why I love Zelda, if you catch my drift. Thanks so much for patiently waiting for my video on this game. I hope you can hang in there for a while longer as I finish up my Tears of the Kingdom video. Before I go, I wanted to talk about something pretty cool. Lost in Cult asked me to promote their latest book, which is all about Outer Wilds. It's called Outer Wilds Design Works, continuing a series of books on game design, art, and analysis that previously featured games like Citizen Sleeper and Sable. And I myself wrote a piece on the 6th generation of consoles for the Console Chronicles. Needless to say, I was very excited about the opportunity to talk about this book. First of all, if you've never played Outer Wilds and you're a fan of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, do yourself a favor and play it. Now. If you've already played it, then you'll probably be happy to hear about this. Designworks is more than just an art book, as it contains exclusive developer interviews and never-before-seen artwork, commentary from the community, as well as essays and analysis by Chris Schilling, formerly of Edge magazine. It is designed to be the ultimate look into the game's development and what exactly makes it special. The deluxe edition of the book also comes with physical goodies like a 3D papercraft spaceship model, 6 posters, a map of the solar system, postcard and sticker sets, and even projection stones like the ones in the game that will help you to solve puzzles and secrets within the book. All in a massive, gorgeous box. If you'd like to check this book out, check the link in the description and use the code LiamTriforce for 5% off. Thanks so much to Lost in Cult for the opportunity. I've been Liam Triforce. Thanks for watching.